Welcome to another episode of Respections. Today we have a presentation and we hope you will enjoy. Stay tuned for many more exciting episodes. I'm your host Patrick Tomlinson, and I do look forward to having you and sharing with
you. Days has come and days has gone. Oh yeah, days are coming and many more yet to be born. And I ask you, what are we gonna do? I ask you, my sister, what are we gonna do for them in those crucial times?
So I'm going to turn to Ambassador Henry-Martin now, because Ambassador Henry-Martin's role this evening is to give us the Kittitian and Nevisian experience of migration, and I know you wanted to take a moment to give that some context for us, so I'm giving you the floor, Ambassador Henry-Martin, now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I want to salute my fellow panelists and also join in congratulating LOAF for the exciting work that's happening, and I know there are plans to do even greater things, and so huge commendations are already in order. I want to apologize that I have not been feeling very well, but I gave a commitment and I meant I would be here this evening. And because I'm taking antihistamines that want me to sleep, I made it a point to put my notes in order so that I can be coherent and substantive at the same time and not leave anything out. So I'm going to reflect on what I have here. For me, it is an honor and also my duty to give voice today to a legacy too often silenced or sidelined in global discussions on migration, development, and the shaping of modern societies. And that is the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, our forebears, our neighbors, and our kin, whose indelible contributions to the development of nations far beyond their shores form a living testimony to resilience, sacrifice, and excellence. I am proud that almost everywhere you go in the United States of America, in the UK, in Panama, in the Dominican Republic, and in other countries around the world where our people stepped out in search of opportunities to better their own lives and the lives of future generations, we have not only just been there, we have helped to build nations. We have been in the fields, in the railways, in the classrooms and clinics, in the nurseries and kitchens, and at the bedsides of the sick and the elderly. We were there in moments of growth, in moments of crisis, and in the quiet, unrecorded work that still sustains societies. Work often dismissed as unskilled, yet without which all of the nations that I have referenced and others that I have not referenced would not have attained the heights that they have attained today. Let us turn the page of history together so that we make a lasting memory in honor of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, whose work must be recognized even when they fail to mention it. The abolition of slavery in 1834 brought freedom only in name, but not in opportunity. And with limited access to land and economic redress, many Kittitians and Nevisians were forced to look for opportunity elsewhere. Between 1904 and 1914, according to my research, more than 25,000 persons from the Eastern Caribbean, including many from St. Kitts and Nevis, traveled to Panama to work. And it is on their backs and with their strength, under the most grueling of circumstances, the canal was completed in no small part because we were there. In the search for opportunity, we went even further. In the early 20th century and again in the 1940s, 50s, hundreds and thousands even of Kittitians and Nevisians migrated to the Dominican Republic, working in agriculture and domestic service. And despite the language barrier and cultural differences, our people planted more than sugarcane. They planted roots, they raised families, and they helped to power industries that in turn powered the nations. In the United States Virgin Islands, I think we're all familiar with the fact that thousands of persons from St. Kitts and Nevis went to the United States Virgin Islands in the 1950s and onwards to work in St. John's, St. Thomas, St. Croix. They became nurses, teachers, public servants, construction workers, and domestic aides, helping to fill essential gaps in a United States territory. And so now we're coming more towards the United States. As recently as in 2010, census data drawn from the US Virgin Islands indicated that nearly 10,000 residents of St. Kitts and Nevis, 10,000 residents of the US Virgin Islands claimed to have been born in St. Kitts and Nevis, with many more second and third generation descendants. Our presence was not marginal. It was fundamental and foundational. When Britain turned to the Commonwealth to rebuild after World War II, it was the Caribbean to which it turned. On June 22nd, 1948, the Empire Windrush docked at Tilbury with hundreds of Caribbean nationals, among them nationals of St. Kitts and Nevis, answering the call to rebuild a wounded Britain. They became part of what is now known as the Windrush generation, contributing in education, transport, healthcare, and domestic service. I want to say with great pride that the people of St. Kitts and Nevis did not just work, did not just contribute. They were entrusted with the most valuable assets and the seeds of future generations in the families where they worked. They took care of children. They took care of the elderly. They cooked the food of the persons in whose families they resided. And what I want to say is they upheld the most valuable stock of future generations of the United States of America and Great Britain. But also Canada. Beginning in the 1960s, when emancipation policies shifted to favor skilled and educated workers, Kittitians and Nevisians answered the call in their tens of thousands. Their work was not just familial by what they were doing. It was economic in scope. We cared for the most vulnerable, and we helped to create foundations on which generations would move into the future. I want to say that according to US Census data as of 2020, 25,000 individuals born in St. Kitts and Nevis reside in the United States. And of course, that number rises significantly when you include second and third generations. They found work in nursing homes, hospitals, schools, factories, in every corner where you can still find generations of Kittitians and Nevisians, in New York particularly, Miami, Atlanta, Washington, D.C. We taught children, cleaned offices, built homes, drove cabs, and opened small businesses. And we became more than persons who had come from St. Kitts and Nevis to work. We became part of the fabric of every society in which we lived. We cared for the children when others went to work. We read to the students when no one else had the time. We held the hands of dying parents in their final days. We cooked meals, mended clothes, and poured into these families the love that we brought with us from St. Kitts and Nevis, even when our own families were left behind and we continued to love them too. We came with enough love to share, and we still held love for the people that we left behind. So we were not just part of a labor force in the global north. We came and we embraced our new societies with the love that we brought as family. We've bought homes, we've sent our children to university, we built churches and cultural associations, and we celebrate Carnival wherever we are, even when it's cold, and we fly our flags with pride, even in unfamiliar lands. We've become professors, CEOs, union leaders, civil servants, and elected officials. We have never stopped believing in our dignity and our human worth. And we do not intend to start. And so I close by saying with great pride that we are going to claim the honor we deserve. We are going to say, thank us, acknowledge us, honor us, because we were there and we are still here, and we will continue to build, continue to care, and continue to rise.
Thank you, Ambassador Henry-Martin. Thank you so much. I think this is a good point to bring in Dr. Straun. And Dr. Straun's purpose this evening is to give us the mental health science behind this whole concept of migration. So my first question to you, Dr. Straun. Carol Phillips, who's a Kittitian author, in a New World Order selected essays, writes, I recognize the place, I feel at home here, but I don't belong. I am of and not of this place. Dr. Straun, explain for us the process of assimilation for Caribbean nationals who take the leap to migrate to countries in the global north. What are some of the general impacts to one's psyche, both positive and negative?
Thank you, Lo, for this amazing event. Sitting here, I'm a student of history, student of information, and I wish I had a pad and pen just to take notes. Even before going forward, I think just another round of applause for everything that's been said so far. So going back to that quote is very profound, and I just want to repeat it again. You said, I recognize the place, I feel at home here, but I don't belong. I am of and not of this place. That's pretty profound, and in so many ways it captures what I think many Caribbean nationals feel but don't often say. It speaks to that emotional limbo that we're sometimes in. I call it emotional limbo, emotional split, where we're neither here or there. My new term for that is I'm in a hybrid space, but it's where you're familiar with the surrounding. You might even be successful in that surrounding in terms of however we define success, but you're carrying an internal sense of disconnection or not fully belonging. What I also find too is even if you don't realize that, you just gotta take one trip to your island for Carnival and you come back and you're like, I do feel it now. Because that's what it felt like for me in terms of even this recent trip to St. Kitts for Carnival, the first time since 2007. So when we think of the process of assimilation, is often talked about as if it's this linear, straightforward path. You arrive, you adapt, you survive, you thrive, you're all good. But assimilation is not like that. And from a mental health perspective, it's more like a psychological negotiation of self. You're not just adapting, but you're constantly editing and re-editing aspects of your life, even when it just doesn't even make sense. So now parts of yourself are either muted or lost, and you just continue because your brain says, I need to continue to survive. I have to succeed, even in systems that may not even had you in mind. So assimilation is not just about adaptation, it's a survival strategy. And survival, as we know, psychologically, I tell you, as humans, survival is a primary human need. And we will do whatever we need to do to stay afloat, to stay alive, but at what cost? The pressure to blend, even when you're losing your language, or you're losing some of your customs, you're losing some of your emotional expression, and that is a cost. Even though invisible, it weighs very heavy on your psyche. When Michelle asked me to do this presentation, it really forced me to go deep and really think about what I wanted to say. As a researcher, understanding why is just as important as understanding what. So we understand assimilation, we understand migration, but why? Why would anyone choose to do that? And some of the panelists have given us some historical perspective in that, but why would we continue to do that? One of the perks of my job, let me just step back, one of the perks of my job is I get to listen to people's story. And I'm telling you, I listen to stories that I personally think are better than anything that's been written or anything that's on Netflix. Like, human stories are fascinating, especially when you're not trying to look for what's wrong with that person, but really just trying to see that person and understand that we're complex and we're mixed with a lot of challenges. So in the process of doing my research, and I gotta tell you, especially with my younger patients and my love for stories, I have a reputation of them saying, Dr. Straun, you're kind of nosy. I'm like, I just want to hear the story. And in my travels back to St. Kitts, I'm getting a new reputation because some of my friends are starting to say, you're really fast. Get out of people's business. That's my best accent, by the way. But, so in the process of doing my research, one of the things that has been just really amazing, because I think I've just opened up a can of conversations in that just reaching out to people from all backgrounds, different generations, talking to family, friends, colleagues, even some of my patients, and asking them about their migration story. And it's just opened up so much conversations, and I'm hoping even conversations like this will continue. And some of the reasons that people would tell me, hey, the reason I migrated is it was for school, or it was for jobs. Maybe I was following a dream. Maybe I was following somebody else's dream. Some people said it was politics. Or in my case, I just didn't have a choice. It just happened, right? So there's so many different reasons as to why people migrated in terms of what was shared with me. But one of the central themes that keep coming up was, and we've used this word over and over, is opportunity, or the idea of opportunity, right? A desire for more, a desire for growth. But what is often overlooked is every opportunity comes with a cost. Yep. And what I think is one of the most consistent costs of migration is, take a guess. Self. Anyone else? Identity. One more. Culture. All of that wrapped together. One of what I think is stress. Stress. And some may say, come on, doc, you can't avoid stress. And stress really is a normal physiological or psychological response to demands and hardship. That is true. But the stress that I'm talking about is chronic stress. The stress where you're overwhelmed and it's coupled with with an inability to respond appropriately, or you don't have the support, or sometimes you don't even know how to ask for support because you're dealing with maybe I'm not deserving of it, or maybe I will be a disappointment, or maybe there's some shame or guilt in even reaching out and asking for support. And what is true is, with that level of chronic stress, you will have a significant impact on your mind, your body, and your spirit. So oftentimes our brain is screaming out, it's too much. But there's certain things in our culture that might say, stop complaining. Just stop complaining. So I'll repeat, stress is a major cause of this process, and migration is a major life stress. And many of you've had similar stories. You're uprooting yourself, you're navigating a new culture, you're facing systemic barriers, could be from racism, discrimination, things that you thought that you understood, you don't really understand until you get here. I remember one of my first experiences in college where I was doing pretty well, and one of my professors said, "What type of black are you?" And I'm like, never even thought of myself as a type of black, but he's like, no, what type of black are you? Are you Jamaican? And I was like, what do you mean? At 17 years old, he was trying to input one of the oldest divisive colonial tricks of separating me from people who look like me. And I didn't understand at that time, but I knew enough to say, it doesn't matter. I'm just me. And that's the story of many of us. With that migration, another thing that I also see a lot is credential devaluation. You come from St. Kitts, Nevis, St. Lucia, Barbados, maybe you were a teacher, maybe you were a nurse, and now you enter into a new community and your license doesn't matter. So you have to take a job that requires so much humility. The feelings of disrespect, sometimes even the role reversal as being the head of the household, and now your wife is the head of the household, and you have to deal with that change. So there's so much that's left behind. You have the opportunity, you have a desire to get to some of the things, but in the same process, you're grieving. And a lot of times what happens, if stress is not acknowledged, it turns into trauma. And trauma is a little bit different because sometimes we conflate trauma with hardship. And while hardship may be external, trauma is internal. It's an internal wound that happens that overwhelms our nervous system, our fight or flight response, and it changes your brain. So even when you're not in that traumatic situation, the way you see yourself, the way you see others, the way you see everything is through the lens of trauma. And we don't talk about that enough. Sometimes even when we broach the conversation, you might have someone who emotionally silences you and say, just be strong. Just pray about it. It will pass. But it doesn't. It's something that you have to deal with. And in my practice, the way it shows up cognitively is you may not be able to think the same anymore. Things that might be easy is taking a lot longer. Your focus, your concentration is off. You're struggling with your memory. You're struggling to plan things. And a lot of times, even when you're really highly intelligent, you find yourself compensating even more. So you're working harder than smarter. Emotionally, we're carrying feelings of loneliness, feelings of sadness, anxiety, hopelessness, grief, confusion, shame, guilt, just a suitcase of emotions that makes it so much more difficult to access joy. Behaviorally, because oftentimes when you're struggling with your cognitive in terms of your thinking and your feelings, we have coping response. A very common coping response is to avoid it. We always suppress or just detach. Or sometimes we overcompensate. And overcompensation could be to overworking, overachieving, constantly striving. Maybe a little bit controversial, but sometimes the success that we build is built on unprocessed pain. Some of our greatest stories are rooted in high functional depression and anxiety, which is just a different form of emotional avoidance. We get the degrees, we get the promotions, we're making it. But sometimes it's just an emotional armor that's blocking us from the emotional wounds that we're just not ready to deal with. Move forward a little bit more, because there's some of us who just don't even acknowledge mental issues. So our body has a tendency to not tell lies. And I see this even more sometimes, where especially when I'm dealing with people of color, where unresolved stress and trauma shows up as headaches, high blood pressure, diabetes, autoimmune disease like lupus, arthritis, sleep issues, stomach issues. The body is telling the truth even when our mouth is closed. It sounds really grim, but it isn't, because despite all of that, I still do have some good news. Good news time. And the good news, it sounds really rough, but the good news is, despite all of that, we're still here. Despite all of that, we're still growing. We're still strong. We're still resilient. We're still courageous. And I credit a lot of that to culture, to our culture. A culture that has polarities, like every culture, some good, some bad, some upsides and some downsides. But it's a culture that's filled with a lot of the good stuff. A lot of love, a lot of joy, kindness, laughter, family, community, spirituality, a thirst for education, music, the steel pan, the makajumbi. You know, we're surrounded by beautiful environment, water, sunlight. We're taking vitamin D and we have sunlight all day, all night. Not all night, that doesn't make sense, but we have sunlight all day, right? We have hiking trails. There's so much beauty that we take for granted. There are people paying thousands of dollars to get what we have for free. So in our DNA is something special. We're not just surviving and thriving just because. We're built that way. But we have to be able to get to a point where we're telling our stories. Not just the triumphs, but also the trials. Not trading authenticity for acceptance. Because what I find with migration, a big part of it is a sense and a need to belong. But belonging is not about a place. Belonging is not about geography. It's about recognition. It's about being seen, being heard, being valued. It's not just about how we adapted, but everything we carry, everything we overcame, and we still are. We're beautiful people.
Thank you, Dr. Straun.
Days has come and days is gone. Oh yeah, days are coming and many more yet to be born. And I ask you, what are we gonna do? I ask you, my sister, what are we gonna do for them in those crucial times? Time seems like